All right, everybody. It says we're live. Let me know in the chat if that's actually the case and whether or not you can hear me and see me. And welcome back to another Monday night where we discuss things that are going on in the world relevant to preparedness. And of course, we're talking tonight about giving around the country and how the U.S. in many ways is really not prepared for what might come. And this is something that we should definitely be concerned about because a lot of what we pay regarding taxes, which none of us agree with, should be going to the defense of the nation. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's being invested properly now, does it? So good to see everybody. We got Grisio Nemo, 5 by 4.9. I appreciate that. We got Wing It with Ethan. What's up to you as well? Welcome to My Life says 5 by 5-ish. I'll take that. I think I can work with that. Let's see. Global News Wars. Hey, Magic Prepper, been a while. Well, glad you're here. Thanks for stopping back in. It's much appreciated. Dave Sickles is here as well. Spartan O negative. We have Milham. Yo! And we're going to get going because we got a lot to talk about tonight. And before we get started, I do want to mention that the biggest supporter of the channel is Midway USA. And obviously, they greatly support what I do here. And they're a 2A loving company that supports a guy like me. So that should tell you quite a bit about their values and who they align with. So I appreciate them very much. Now, let's talk about this emergency broadcast, this emergency alert that's going to be happening. It's a test. There's been a lot of information surrounding it, and a lot of people are freaking out about it. And of course, it's something that we'll discuss just because people seem to be on edge about it. I think there's some things to consider here, and I do think there are some interesting correlations, let's just say timing, when it comes to actual military drills that are going on at this exact time when this test will be going. And also the fact that the media is already putting a spin on it, which I think always gives me at least something to consider, right? So first off, this is USA Today saying massive emergency alert test scheduled to hit your phone on Wednesday. Here's what to know. And they start giving you a lot of information. And one of my favorite first lines here is get ready to not freak out. On Wednesday, October 4th at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Time, every TV, radio, and cell phone in the United States should blare out the distinctive, jarring electronic warning tone of an emergency alert. It's a test, only a test. Officially, the trial is called the Nationwide Emergency Alert Test. You know it's a test and not an actual emergency because it's accompanied by an explanation of the test. No, it's not a national conspiracy to infect people with nanoparticles. Yes, it does go back all the way to the Cold War in the 1950s. No, we can't play you the tone. We could get hit with a big fine if we did. Now, that's a lot to unpack. I find it very interesting that they're going right into conspiracy land and try to debunk a lot of the things that people are theorizing about, right? And we have to understand that. First off, some people like to theorize just because there's a level of entertainment surrounding that, right? Considering the most obscure possibilities should be somebody's job in every group, right? Like we have to assume that something crazy could possibly happen. It's okay to think that way. But for the mainstream to literally be attacking that immediately does seem a little bit off just compared to how they usually handle these things. And just to give everybody, I guess, an idea as to what we actually have going on. Oh, great. Of course, I immediately closed the window that I was trying to share. Let's see here. And I'm not going to screw this up completely, I promise. So this is from FEMA's actual news broadcast. There's a giant fly trying to eat my face right now. So this was from FEMA, put out in order to let everybody know about it. And they're saying that, FEMA in coordination with the Federal Communications Commission will conduct a nationwide test of the Emergency Alert System, EAS, which is the radio and TV broadcast, and Wireless Emergency Alerts, WEA, which is the broadcast that you'll receive on your cell phone, okay? And it just goes to tell you all the information we just talked about, and then how it's, in order to try to get the public properly ready for any alerts that need to go out, specifically geared towards a nationwide emergency. And that's another thing that is surrounding this situation that has people a little bit more, I guess, in tune with this whole situation, not because it's an emergency alert system test, but because of the implications of why they feel the need to do it at this point in time, and the fact that it is specifically in regard to a nationwide emergency. So I think that there's a lot of reasons why people are trying to kind of look a little bit further into this, and I can totally understand that. Now, if we jump back over here to the USA Today article, which I chose specifically because of the level of satire they try to spin on people's perceptions and, I don't know, conceived notions about what could happen or could not happen regarding it. If we scroll down, tells you about when it's all going to happen. Here's where, Eastern, Central, Mountain, all the different time zones where it's going to happen. And then let's see, just real quick. Why do we need the test? Federal emergency management coordinators need to make sure the national alert system is still an effective way to warn Americans about emergencies, national catastrophes, attacks, and accidents at the national level. And like I said, there's a lot of focus on the national aspect of it. So I understand that that's just part of the deal, but I do see why people are putting a little bit more concern towards this, okay? And then let's see, I've got one more thing down here. Here we are. Emergency alert test is not a conspiracy theory. And now I can't unhighlight it, of course. There are conspiracy theories on social media suggesting that the warning tone will somehow turn on technology that has been implanted into Americans' bodies, putting them under some sort of control. These claims are untrue. The test cannot harm people and is only to verify the national alert system is working. So here's the thing. I don't think those claims are true either, personally. That's just my opinion. But what I will say is that I find it odd that they felt the need to make sure you were aware of the fact that these things were in fact untrue. And they specifically pulled the nanotechnology route out of the hat and decided to display that for the public to see. And then their only evidence for why this is untrue is just saying that these claims are untrue. This test cannot harm people and is only to verify the national alert system is working. So I find that just to be interesting. I don't think there's necessarily much more to look into there. For me personally, when I see these alerts or these drills happening, I tend to go more towards, okay, so if something were to happen at that same exact time, it would be an interesting way to cover something that was correlated with it, or who knows what else. We've also seen lots of examples throughout history where drills or tests were going on when an actual event occurred. So there was a lot of confusion, or people just so happened to be in the area at the time when something was happening. So I understand why we pay attention to these things and why we consider them to be at least, maybe in the category of a heightened risk scenario for us to kind of be a little bit more situationally aware. But for them to specifically call out certain theories and then to specifically tell you that they're just not true and there's nothing else to see here without any supporting evidence of any kind, which I guess they don't feel they need. But regardless, I just found that to be interesting. And at the very least, when we're digesting this information, especially from these mainstream sources, we should look at everything under the guise of, what is this purpose? Like, what is this here for? It's not just news anymore, right? They don't want us to actually be fully informed. So this could set up a lot of different things into the future, right? This could be setting the stage towards ensuring that whenever they say something is a test or is not a test, there's less and less questions about the validity of that statement, right? Or if there are real concerns as to why these tests might be occurring or something that could be happening in conjunction with them, this hopes to discredit that information in the future in order to go back and say, hey, look, remember this one where everybody said it was nanotechnology that was going to turn on and hurt people? That was false, and we told you it was false, and of course it was false because you didn't see anything like that happen, right? So now you know from here on out, everything we say is exactly how it is. That's just how I look at things. And honestly, I know that just might be a cynical outlook, but I think that based on the way things are going in our world and our country right now, it's very hard not to be a cynic, right? So here we are, but that's just what I wanted to present regarding that. Global News War says, why do they need 30 minutes? I don't know. It's ongoing for 30 minutes, so they say, but I don't think the actual alert will be going off for 30 minutes. So it's more along the lines of the same way you get a weather alert, right? Like, hey, a tornado could be in your area for the next 30 minutes. That's kind of how they're displaying it, because they want to be able to have that same level of information being transmitted, right? Like, oh, over the next 30 minutes, you should anticipate this threat. So I don't know exactly. That's why I wanted to address it. I know a lot of people have been talking about it. And I also thought that there was some interesting things regarding how it was being portrayed more so than the actual test itself. We've been through many tests before. Most likely it's not going to actually lead to anything, but the timing is another thing that we have to consider. So what do we mean by that? And I do want to say I saw some super chats come through. Law of the minimum. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You just got out of the Bay Area, California. That is amazing. I'm sure you'll feel much better about just about everything, because it is a difficult life out there. It's very hard to justify the cost of living. Things are not pristine as they used to be. And, you could make six figures in that area and still be broke. Ask me how I know. So that's just real life. But let's go ahead and talk about why there are some things actually happening while this emergency alert will be going on. And then, yes, we will talk about how another nuclear superpower is doing their own emergency drill here just the day before. In fact, technically right now, it could be started because It's October 3rd in Russia as of right now. But first off, let's talk about this. The Philippines and allies kick off naval drills amid Asia-Pacific tension. This is from October 2nd. This was published today. And in case you're new here, make sure you subscribe and come back and watch these because we talk about things that have happened recently over the past week, or sometimes we reference historic things in order to paint a picture as to why the things we're talking about now have some precedent. And then if you are here on the replay crew, thanks for checking in. And make sure you leave a comment down below because it helps get the message out there. I think we all know how this works now, right? So, Manila, October 2nd. Forces from Manila, Britain, Canada, Japan, and the United States kicked off on Monday 2 weeks of joint naval exercises in Philippine waters as a show of force amid flaring regional tension. With more than 1,800 participants, the drills follow last week's move by Beijing to block Philippine fishermen from Asia's most contested maritime feature, the Scarborough Shoal, held by China in the South China Sea. This year's Sama-Sama drills are being held in the southern part of the island of Luzon, featuring naval exercises in areas such as anti-submarine warfare, air defense, and search and rescue, the Philippine Navy said. With a show of force and active engagement of our allies and partners, Sama-Sama transcends mere military exercises, Philippine Navy Chief Rear Admiral Toribio Adasi said at the opening event. It's a symbol of our enduring partnerships and our shared commitment to security and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. In his remarks, Vice Admiral Carl Thomas, the commander of the U.S. Navy's 17th Fleet, said it is important that all nations have a right to sail and operate in the West Philippine Sea, free from being coerced, free from being intimidated. Now, this is all in response to obvious aggression from China in that part of the ocean, but this is happening right now. So, this is one drill that's going on while these other alerts and everything are being put out there. And it's always good to kind of just check to see what else is happening simultaneously with some of these things because there could be correlation. There may not be. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there is for sure. What I'm saying is that, yes, there are things happening related to drills and emergency alerts all at the same time. This one's interesting. Switzerland to take part in NATO air exercise in Italy. Okay. Switzerland is participating in a NATO air exercise in southern Italy from October 2nd, today, to the 13th to help strengthen defense capacity and international cooperation. Now, of course, that'll be going on during the emergency alert as well. Now, another fact you might not be aware of, I'm sure most of you are, but in case you're not, Switzerland is not a member of NATO. So this is somewhat interesting because in the past, the Swiss have generally been rather neutral. And here they are conducting air defense exercises with NATO, most likely in anticipation of further escalation of the conflict. So this should tell you quite a bit about where we're at this point in time. The Swiss Army will send 45 soldiers to the NATO Tiger Meet in Gioia del Colle. I said that so bad. Gioia del Colle in southern Italy. The Federal Department of Defense said in a statement on Monday, pilots will deepen their knowledge via the participation of 5 FA-18 aircraft. This air exercise is one of the largest organized in Europe. In total, 13 countries are participating, with over 70 combat aircraft, 15 helicopters, and 1,500 soldiers. The objective is to test air defense beyond borders, joint force operating scenario, to exchange experiences, and to compare capabilities. Every year, the NATO Tiger Meet welcomes the air forces of several countries of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Switzerland, which is not a member of NATO, participates under NATO's Partnership for Peace program. The Swiss Air Force has been a member of the NATO Tigers Association since 1981 and participated in the Tiger Meet since 2004. So there are drills happening simultaneously as these emergency alerts and these other emergency drills that are going on in adversarial countries. So that's where things get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more chaotic considering the timing of everything. And that's something that we have to always keep in mind. Timing means more than you would assume, right? And a lot of what we're seeing with this conflict, at least in my opinion, and look, I'm not some sort of elite military analyst or anything along those lines, but what I can say is that it's very possible the reason we haven't seen the escalations that many of us have assumed we would have seen by now based on everything occurring over in Eastern Europe is because the timing is just not right. And timing is everything in war, and we might not have had that window of opportunity for either side to make that grandiose statement through whatever weapon system they might have decided upon, right? So these are things to consider. Timing has a lot to do with just about everything, especially in the news cycle, right? We all know how our politicians and the government likes to treat the weekend as if it's just the, hey, forget everything you just saw us do this past week for these next 2 days, and then by Monday, we'll just move on. We see how that works. So there is a lot to do with timing. All right, so Chupacabra 304. Hey, ready for anything? Glad you are and glad you're here. Let's see. We also have Jimmy of the Sea. Why not just buy UHMWPE, which I didn't want to try to say. The ground next to my steel targets looks, well, it looks scary. Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of things that we could all benefit from, but not all of us can get all of them at once, right? House of Lamar, I have unfortunately convinced you that I'm not a Fed, and I did my best for everybody in that video just to help you understand that either you really think I am one, or I am definitely not one now. So whatever it works, whatever works for you works for me. And here's the poll for everybody tonight. Is Magic Prepper a Fed? So enjoy that one. I'm enjoying that whole conversation in general because you know what? It's something that we should probably stop trying to perpetuate. And the main reason I made that video is because it's not about the trolling, which a lot of people mention like, hey man, it's just the trolls. Get over it, right? It's not that. There are people with legitimate fears about sharing any opinions or conversation even within our community due to fear of federal involvement of some level of spying, right? And I think that that's because of the trolling aspect of what we have here in the community. But I don't want those people to feel ostracized or unable to interact because of that fear. So that's why I wanted to put that out there. That's their best weapon against us is fear to network and fear to organize and fear to build community, right? Like that makes everything a lot easier for them. And in fact, these same tactics were used during, I don't know, like the 1930s to 40s in certain parts of Europe. So this is old news, new news. Now, let's move on. Viv B says, "Dong dong, the witch is dead." I caught that out of the corner of my eye, and I wanted to let everyone know. Russia is doing some things and some stuff. Okay, stuff, things. It's what Russia does. Let's take a look. Well, they're preparing nationwide drills with a nuclear war scenario, which start today, because today in Russia is already October 3rd, and it's the day before our emergency alert system. Now, I am going to let you guys know, I am going to be talking about this whole free potassium iodide thing here in just a little bit too, because I found that to be interesting, and I want everyone to at least be aware of it so that you can possibly do some research and maybe get some for yourself depending on where you live. But I also find the timing of that strange. But let's talk about this first, and maybe that gives us some concepts as to why free potassium iodide might be being distributed more regularly suddenly, right? So Russian authorities will hold large-scale drills across the country on October 3rd because of the growing danger of armed conflicts, including with nuclear-capable powers near Russia's borders. The Bazam Telegram channel, which is linked to Russia's security services, reported on Thursday, citing the head of Russia's Federal Service for Surveillance on Consumer Rights Protection and Human Well-Being, or Rospotrabnadzor. I don't know. I did that one the best I could. This will be the first time that Moscow has held such drills. The first time, by the way. Like, that's indicative of things being unusual. Which will imagine that Russia is at least partially under martial law and that up to 70% of the country's housing facilities have been destroyed. The outlet reported. The exercises will also suppose that general mobilization has ended and there is the possibility of radioactive contamination, Baza reported. Leaders and officials from across Russian society, from civil defense leaders to heads of state corporations, will take part in the drills, according to the report. However, the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson that Russia annexed in September 2022 are exempt from the drills, Baza added. Smaller, similar-scale exercises have already taken place in several Russian regions, the outlet added. Newsweek had reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry for comment via email. Nuclear tensions have skyrocketed since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the conflict now in its 20th month. Russia has both alluded to the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons and cautioned against the suggestion of the war turning nuclear, while Ukraine's Western backers have been hesitant at times of potentially escalating the grueling conflict through their military aid. Potentially hesitant, I'm not sure about that, because it doesn't seem like we're very hesitant about just continually pumping arms and funding into Ukraine. Now, regardless of how you feel about that situation, we are definitely doing that, which if you're Russia, is bad. So I would say that we are less than hesitant when it comes to potentially escalating this conflict, but that's just my opinion. As Russian troops poured into Ukraine late February, Russian President Vladimir Putin placed Russia's nuclear deterrence forces on high alert. Months later, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the risks of nuclear conflict were now considerable, right? So we all know that that's all part of the deal. Yeah, they're working with North Korea now. They've been threatening nuclear strikes since the beginning, everything else. But the big takeaway here is that they're running a nationwide nuclear attack response drill where they are simulating martial law and assuming that 70% of all housing in the country is destroyed. So those numbers don't just come out of thin air. Countries don't just do these drills based on assumptions that they just pulled off of a whiteboard, right? These numbers are their expectation of what a nuclear war would look like with the United States. Russia's not worried about being nuked by China. Russia's not worried about being nuked by anyone else but the United States. And because of that, in their opinion, apparently, 70% of their housing will be destroyed if they go into a full-scale nuclear conflict with us. But that also tells you that this drill is their way of figuring out how to deal with that, which might give you some things to consider regarding the fact that there might be some willingness there to endure those types of losses, especially if drills like this one show that it's actually not that bad. And yeah, we can accommodate those people that are suddenly displaced. And yeah, actually, martial law was pretty good. Like, we were able to do whatever we wanted for quite a bit of time. And all those people needed us because they're suddenly desperate and homeless. So honestly, it's working out really good for the Kremlin here, where we have martial law, we've got everybody relying on the government, and that nuclear exchange, well, the U.S. is about in the same position. And I wonder if there is any correlation there. I don't have this evidence to be able to say that for sure, but if Russia assumes 70% of its housing is destroyed based on a nuclear war with the United States, then I wonder if that number would be similar here as well. Questionable, unsure, but possible, right? And even if that number was halved, let's just half it and say 35% of all housing is destroyed in the United States during a nuclear exchange with Russia. I mean, that's devastating, end of the world type stuff, because a third of the country is suddenly without homes, which means a third of the country is suddenly extremely dependent on anyone else that's willing to help. And our government, at least during times of emergency, has not proven to be very good at reacting. Just my opinion. Ask the residents of Maui how they feel about our federal response to their emergency, where a lot of their housing was also wiped out. So, which is honestly really frustrating and a huge tragedy that's still just not resolved in any way, shape, or form. But as the media does and as the government does, we just move on, right? So, and anyone here who's from Hawaii and dealing with that still, I'm sorry you have to go through that. So I hope you're doing all right, and I'm just glad that you were able to make it through. Now, let's see. We are going to talk about how some of our states are actually almost look like they're trying to do something about some of this, right? Some of our states here in the U.S. Seem like they're using locations and proximities to said locations as an excuse to start giving out some of this life-saving resource in order to help their constituents through an emergency. But I do find the timing interesting, and I do find the fact that we're now just doing quite a bit of this to be at least worth a look, not to mention the fact that it's possible, depending on where you live and what time of year it might be at this point, but you may be eligible to get a bunch of free potassium iodide. So these are things that we're going to discuss right now. But real quick, I do also want to mention that Genesis Gold Group is a sponsor of this channel. And if you are interested in investing your assets to something a little bit more stable, like precious metals, then make sure you check out Genesis Gold Group through magicpreppergold.com. It supports the channel. It also helps you out if you want to get gold and silver, or if you want to roll your retirement account into a gold-backed IRA. They can help you with that. And guess what? My favorite part about them is that they're not associated with the CCP at all. And if you don't think that some of these big gold groups are actually associated with China, you should do some more research, because you'll be surprised to find out just how many of them actually are. And that's concerning for me, because I don't think I want to put my resources where China has final control over where they're allocated to, right? So I just put that in the chat, magicpreppergold.com. If you're interested in that, it helps to support the channel, and it might be something that you want to do to stabilize some of your assets, because we don't know what this economy or anything's going to do. And gold and silver, at least throughout history, has been a decent bet compared to a lot of other things. But hey, that's not financial advice. I'm just the guy that's sending you to the people who probably can give you actual financial advice. That being said, let's talk about what's going on in Delaware right now. Delaware has some interesting things happening that you should probably be aware of, okay? October events, and this is from Delaware's state government website. So this is just what's being put out to the public via the government in Delaware. Emergency sirens test. This is near the Salem Hope Creek nuclear generating stations, okay? October 3rd, quarterly siren activation and test of emergency alert system. So they're doing a test just to kind of make sure if there is a nuclear incident at the power plant there, that the people nearby will be alerted of it and they can start activating emergency services, right? Okay, just like the national test that's going on October 4th. This is an EAS test, which means it's going to test the radio as well as the TV, whereas the national test here is EAS and WEA, which is the radio, TV, and your cell phone. So keep that in mind. But the state of Delaware is doing their own test the day before, and it is in relation to a nuclear emergency at their power plant. And then we're moving on to Wednesday, where we're doing the nationwide test, okay? But then on the 5th, they're giving out free potassium iodide tablets to those who live or work within 10 miles of the Salem Hope Creek nuclear stations. Now, I know that because of what's happening in Eastern Europe right now, with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, there was a lot of concerns about a meltdown there. And there still are concerns, and there's still the possibility of that happening at any point in time in all reality. So it could be that these strategic targets, which they most honestly are, could be being looked at a little bit differently from our state governments as well as from, our Department of Defense. And it's possible that there's being a little bit more of like a civil defense strategy being put into place here in order to get people ready for things that could occur here in the future. So the Delaware Emergency Management Agency and Delaware Division of Public Health will distribute free potassium iodide tablets to those who live or work within the 10 miles of the Salem Hope Creek nuclear generating stations in New Jersey radius, also known as the Emergency Planning Zone or EPZ. The free tablets will be distributed on Thursday, October 5th between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. at the Townsend Fire Company, 107 Main Street, Townsend, Delaware. Okay? Potassium iodide is available to residents who have received it previously and whose tablets have reached their expiration date, as well as those who have never received the tablets before. Individuals with home or business addresses within the EPZ are eligible to receive the potassium iodide tablets. Recipients must bring a photo ID, such as a driver's license, proof of residency, such as a utility bill, or proof of employment within the EPZ when they go to the Townsend Fire Company. This is the only requirement to receive potassium iodide tablets. Residents who have potassium iodide that has expired can bring those tablets to the distribution center to exchange for new ones. This is something that you should do if you're in that EPZ. I mean, if you are able and qualified to get free potassium iodide, go get it. There's really no downside here, right? I would do it. And if you can get as much as humanly possible, I would do that as well. And then share it with your MAG or your community or your immediate family or whoever might be lacking in that department. But this is free potassium iodide. Now, they're using the nuclear power station there as the reason for why they're distributing it, which makes sense, I guess. But I find it interesting, both timing-wise and just due to the fact that this isn't something that most people are aware of, is available for free depending on location and proximity to these places, right? Another thing I want to mention is that in case you're not aware, potassium iodide is not like a cure-all for radiation exposure. What it does is it basically fills your thyroid with iodide and doesn't allow the radioiodide to then penetrate your thyroid or to be stored within it, which then allows you to avoid radiation poisoning within your thyroid. So, and that was a very simplified way of saying that, but basically, it's still a very important thing to have if you're in a nuclear event. And if you are going to be exposed to radiation or fallout of any kind, potassium iodide tablets become very valuable and useful in those situations. So I would go get these for free. Now, guess what? Delaware is not the only place doing this. And this is what I really found interesting. And so I want you, after this live stream, to go and start looking to see if maybe in your area you have access to the same thing. Because this actually happened in Pennsylvania as well just a month ago. September 2nd, 2022. Health Department distributing free potassium iodide tablets to Pennsylvanians near state's 4 active nuclear power plants. So that's 4 more areas in another state that could have received free potassium iodide on September 15th. So I think this is something that you should be looking for. If you live near a nuclear power station, I would just search it up and find out if there is any distribution of potassium iodide happening in your area, because it's access to a free resource that us preppers should have on hand. I have enough potassium iodide. I don't feel like I'm lacking in that department at all. But if it was being offered for free in my area, I would still go get it. The main reason being is that I can still provide my neighbors or my community or anyone within my mutual assistance group with additional potassium iodide that I didn't have to pay for. So it's just an extra resource that's not going to be a bad thing to have on hand. So if you have access to free potassium iodide, please go get it. And apparently the government's willing to give it away for free, as long as you live near a nuclear power station. So if you do, research it, find out if you qualify, and go get it, and then get as much as you can, and then hopefully you can share that with others who don't have as much as you. And that will help a lot during any type of radiological emergency. So, you know what? I also... Rob Sinelli, I don't want you to search the nuclear plants. You should already know if they're there or not. I just want you to search if you can get free potassium iodide. Come on, man, you know? I love this chat. You guys are the best, by the way. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was valuable. And honestly, in this economy, any preps I can get that I don't have to buy myself, and let's be honest, we already bought them. This is taxpayer funded. It's not something that you aren't already chipping in for. Go get your money back, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. And I also thought it was just interesting because I don't think a lot of people were aware that that was something you could get. And I wasn't personally aware of it either. So here you are. That's what I'm trying to give you guys, just more than just the news. I want to have solutions. I want to give you some concepts or some ideas that maybe you haven't been aware of before. And that was one that was for me new. So I thought it would probably be new for quite a few people here as well. The chat is a third of you think I'm a Fed and 2/3 said that I'm not. So I like that. I think we can balance that out. 1 out of every 3 is suspicious. And I think that's healthy prepperism right there. You should be skeptical as a prepper. So I appreciate that about our community here. I think the other ones just have been around long enough to be like, this clown cannot receive a pension. So let's go ahead and talk about some other things going on that kind of show why the U.S. is not prepared to the degree that we probably need to be if this thing escalates further. And there's no indication that it won't. As of right now, I feel like it's getting worse because they just don't stop. Nobody ever stops pushing more and more into this conflict. So, and while all this is happening in Eastern Europe, China's over here still doing their thing too. Like there is no shortage of escalatory scenarios here. And we're not helping either. It's not the United States is some great peace negotiator at this point in time. We are definitely providing our own reasons for why this isn't getting better. That being said, and here's the thing, I'm not trying to say the United States isn't the greatest military on the planet or anything like that. That's not my goal here. We still are. Trust me. Like we technologically and just financially best military on the planet. Okay. But things are not as cut and dry as they used to be. And we're talking near peer now. And near peer changes a lot of the equation. And I mean, think about it just from your own perspective as a prepared citizen, right? Things like night vision used to be, hey, I'm the only guy with it. Now that all the cartels have it, all the gangsters have it, everybody on your street has it if they have disposable income, right, to that degree. So some rich guy who maybe an a-hole has it, but doesn't necessarily, align with your values or whatever you want to call it, right? Well, if everybody's got it now, the old mantra of, all right, laser aiming modules, and throwing IR downrange to light targets in order to let everybody know, where we're targeting next, that's not going to work the same way anymore. Now you have to adapt and you have to start moving towards passive aiming solutions and not using IR to tag targets or who knows what else. And this is a good analogy as to why that's happening in actual conventional warfare now at this point in time as well. And we're seeing it happen in real time because even though the United States ourselves aren't necessarily at war, our equipment is, and our hardware is, and the troops we're training are, right? And even those troops are actually starting to back away from some of our NATO training now, which we'll talk about here right now. NATO hardware not designed to fight Russia, Wall Street Journal. Interesting. Let's move forward. The claim was made by a Ukrainian drone procurer. So this was made by someone who's on the side of the West. This isn't just Russia saying that to make us, look bad for their people and for their media purposes. This is from a Ukrainian drone procurer who believes that Western warfighting techniques are outdated. I thought this was interesting, and then we're going to talk about how there's a few more things that are extremely concerning regarding just how ill prepared we might actually be when things really come push to shove. But let's start here. Some of the West's modern heavy weapons are not suitable for the Ukraine conflict because their design has been shaped by decades of fighting involving much weaker opponents. The Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday. A lot of Western armor doesn't work here because it had been created not for an all-out war, but for conflicts of low or medium intensity. A Ukrainian promoter of drone warfare named Taras Chmut told the outlet, if you throw it into a mass offensive, it just doesn't perform. His opinion was one of several cited by the Wall Street Journal, as it argued that the prevalence of cheap drones in Ukraine has affected the fighting so much that NATO-promoted approaches simply cannot work there. The U.S. and its allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops over the years. This summer, they expected the Ukrainians to put their skills and Western weapons to use and breach Russian defensive lines in the south of the front line, according to media reports. The kind of combined arms maneuvers Washington advocated may no longer be possible in principle, the Wall Street Journal suggested. Drones swiftly detect any significant force, calling in fire, and kamikaze variants are capable of disabling much more expensive weapon systems. Chmut, whose Come Back Alive Foundation raises funds to procure drones for the Ukrainian military, said Western nations would be better off providing a larger quantity of cheaper, simpler systems. That sounds almost like an Eastern approach, doesn't it? Similarly, Ukrainian complaints about NATO's assumptions were published by Le Monde on Wednesday. The French newspaper interviewed frontline troops about the benefit or lack thereof of the training they received from foreign backers. One anecdote mentioned by Le Monde claimed that a German-trained recruit had to be sent back because he only knew how to operate a column formation. Kiev stopped using these after suffering heavy losses in the initial push against Russia in June. I repeatedly told them that NATO manuals didn't apply to Ukraine, a soldier said of his training in England. Their reply was that that's how it was, everything was predetermined. Our soldiers are more experienced than the ones who are supposed to train them. Many of them have been fighting for 10 years, another one said. We are a long way away from NATO standards. Kiev has blamed a shortage of Western support in relation to its summer counteroffensive for its underwhelming results so far. U.S. officials cited by the media have argued that Kiev unnecessarily wasted resources, refusing to concentrate forces for a decisive strike, and was too averse to incurring casualties. Well, for one, I will say that I think being averse to incurring casualties is a reasonable approach usually, right? Like generally, I try not to incur casualties, whether or not I'm playing StarCraft or Command and Conquer or whatever RTS is on the screen at the time. I don't like casualties. I don't think anybody does. But I thought that was interesting because it kind of demonstrates that it is true, if you want to look at it from an objective standpoint, all the wars we've been fighting for the last 20 or 30 years have generally been against much weaker opponents, right? Not near-peer conflict. We have been dealing with people in countries like Iraq or Afghanistan where we owned the sky. We had air superiority. We also had technological superiority when it came to all of our weaponry and our systems and everything else. So honestly, there's probably some level of built-in doctrine from those decades of fighting those types of wars that has bled over to this new conflict, which doesn't necessarily apply, which is something you can take away as a prepared person. You can always adapt to your situation and change the way things are based on a new presentation or environment, right? You don't have to always fall upon the basic manual of arms, right? There's always another approach if need be. And that's something you should be ready to do as a prepper, is always adapt to a new situation. It doesn't have to be militaristic in nature. It can always be related to anything, right? Hey, my entire house is rigged up for backup solar power. Oh man, nuclear winter, there's no sun. Well, I guess I'll just quit then. No, I think there's other ways to generate power, but we're going to have to get creative, right? There's always a good reason to adapt. But this could be indicative of some of the issues that we could face if we were to actually find ourselves in a conflict with a near-peer adversary. Now, based on that information, let's talk about where we're lacking in the sense of strategic stockpile. Because in this country, we need reserves just like every other country does, and we might be lacking or falling behind in some of those endeavors. All right, this is from September 27th from Gregory Werscher and Jack Little. The U.S. government should stockpile more critical minerals. Now, this is very interesting because it doesn't seem like we're where we need to be when it comes to having to face a near-peer adversary in a war. Okay. The statutory purpose of the National Defense Stockpile is to stockpile strategic and critical materials in order to decrease and to preclude, when possible, a dangerous and costly dependence by the United States upon foreign sources or a single point for failure or of failure for supplies of such materials in times of national emergency. In other words, the National Defense Stockpile should contain enough materials to support the U.S. military and essential civilian needs in a hypothetical war scenario. While classified, this war scenario is likely a U.S.-Chinese conflict over Taiwan, including a homeland defense situation. The Department of Defense says the Defense Logistics Agency, the agency responsible for managing the National Defense Stockpile, uses a robust, data-driven modeling process to determine the appropriate levels of minerals in the National Defense Stockpile, meeting these levels by acquiring more minerals when necessary and selling some minerals when possible. To best ensure the defense industrial base has adequate minerals for a high-intensity, long-duration U.S.-Chinese conflict, the National Defense Stockpile should contain enough critical materials to satisfy 3 years of U.S. domestic demand. The U.S. government should prioritize stockpiling critical minerals and platforms and munitions likely to attrit in a U.S.-Chinese conflict and sourcing these minerals primarily from the United States and secondarily from U.S. allies. A stockpile inadequate for war. Here's where things get interesting. In a hypothetical conflict, the U.S. military would use platforms and munitions that contain substantial critical minerals. For example, in a 2013 report, the Department of Defense said that one Virginia-class submarine requires 9,200 pounds of rare earth elements and that one Aegis destroyer requires 5,200 pounds of rare earth elements. The attrition of these platforms, munitions, and the critical minerals that constitute them would require replenishment during a conflict. The duration and intensity of the hypothetical conflict should determine whether to prioritize replenishing platforms or munitions, and thus which critical minerals to stockpile and to what extent. To illustrate, in a short, intense war, replenishing munitions will take priority as new platforms will not be built and fielded in time for combat. Consequently, replenishing antimony in artillery and cruise missiles would be more important than replenishing rare earth elements in submarines and destroyers. The U.S. military would also have to replenish other technologies enabled by critical minerals like gallium in semiconductors and lanthanum in night vision goggles. Despite the high attrition of platforms, munition, and critical minerals in a potential U.S.-Chinese conflict, the value of minerals in the National Defense Stockpile has fallen 98%, from $4.2 billion in 1952. That is correct. 1952 to $888 million in 2021. While the 1952 National Defense Stockpile likely prepared for a global nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union, and the 2021 National Defense Stockpile likely prepares for a limited, localized conflict with the Chinese military, the National Defense Stockpile today only requires 2% of the Cold War era stockpile. Seems low, especially given limited non-Chinese mineral suppliers and high American mineral demand in a potential conflict. Furthermore, mineral stocks in the U.S. stockpile are far less than minerals in China's strategic reserves. China has estimated 7,000 metric tons of cobalt in its strategic reserves, while the U.S. National Defense Stockpile contains just over 300 metric tons, down from over 24,000 metric tons in 1990. Given its low mineral stocks, the National Defense Stockpile model may underestimate the duration and intensity of a U.S.-Chinese conflict, underestimating U.S. mineral demand, and it may also overestimate U.S. access to domestic and foreign minerals, overestimating U.S. mineral supply. So, I know that was long, and I know it was lengthy, but it should demonstrate to you that we are way less prepared for a long-duration conflict with a near-peer adversary than we used to be. In 1952, we had $4.2 billion in reserves because we were worried about a global nuclear catastrophe with Russia. And in 2021, that fell to $888 million, right? Because now we're just worried about localized conflicts. Localized conflict with China is all we're worried about, but for some reason, they have 7,000 metric tons of cobalt, while we have only 300. This should tell you quite a bit about our current preparedness level as a country, we are underestimating a lot. We're underestimating our adversaries. We're underestimating our requirements when it comes to resupply and resource acquisition. We're just not prepared for what is likely happening here soon. And just to demonstrate even further, this is how this to me is kind of ridiculous. I don't even understand this, but we're so unprepared that the Marine Corps can't even get enough camouflage. We are in a recruiting crisis. We literally can't even recruit enough troops. There aren't enough Marines in the Marine Corps. And even with a shortage of troops, we can't even get enough camouflage for the troops that we have. This is not demonstrative of a well-prepared scenario, right? This is not where we want the United States to be while global war is literally on the menu. But here we are. Leaders of Marine units can let their service members wear non-standard uniform items amid a long-term shortage of the regular camouflage uniform. The Marine Corps says it won't have a full stock of the woodland pattern camouflage combat utility uniform, the everyday outfit for most Marines, until summer or fall of 2024. They're telling us about this now, and it's literally going to be a year until they have all the camo they need. We can't even get our soldiers the camouflage they need. So they don't have the camouflage they need. We don't have the strategic reserves when it comes to minerals, especially regarding rare earth minerals and things that are required for nuclear reactors and submarines and destroyers and everything else that's going to be destroyed during a conflict, because that's just how things work in a war, right? But we can't even get camouflage. What is happening, right? This flexibility is a rare step for a service that prides itself on adherence to strict uniform standards. What we cannot have is a situation where a Marine is wearing an unserviceable cami, because that looks bad for the Corps. And we can't have a situation where the Marine is being given a hard time about those unserviceable camis. Commandant General Eric Smith said in a video message to the force Thursday, using a nickname for the camouflage combat utility uniform. Okay. We're going to get this fixed, Marines, but it's going to take a little patience, Smith said. It's going to take a year to get camouflage for the soldiers who need camouflage to not get shot. I don't even know. I can go online right now and order whatever I want in multicam, right? So, I'm just a little perplexed, I guess, right? We're so prepared that we sold off all of our strategic reserves, which, clearly wasn't how we were floating our economy over the last few decades, I guess. Because, where'd that money go? I don't know. Don't worry about it. But at the same time, we don't have any rare earth minerals, and we don't have any strategic minerals, and we also don't have any camouflage. This is a ridiculous situation. I don't know what else to say. I just don't understand. Okay. That being said, like I said, we have missed the par that's required in order to maintain a serviceable force when it comes to recruitment. Okay, we're a volunteer army, volunteer military, which means we don't have a draft as of right now, but we also don't have enough people. We don't have enough camouflage for the people we do have, but what else is going on regarding all that? There's been a lot of concern about a draft coming back because of the fact that we're shorthanded. This is a podcast that I'm going to actually post in the chat right now. And I implore you to go ahead and listen to it when you get a chance. But I'll give you the cliff notes right now. Northern Girl Hobbies, thanks for being here. Thanks for modding. I appreciate it. Recruit, retain, draft. Raising an army for large-scale conflict. This came out a week ago. This is a really well-done podcast from experts in the field who are trying to figure out just what we would do if we were to have a large-scale conflict erupt with either China or Russia. Because right now, we do not have the manpower to sustain that type of a war. Okay? If there is a large-scale combat operation and we start sustaining casualties, in order for us to be able to continue the fight and sustain the fight based on the time available and the number of reserves that are available, we would have to almost immediately start to reauthorize the draft. And again, that just does not give us a chance to have a national dialogue and to start thinking about what does this mean or what does this actually mean. And there are a lot of problems with reinitiating the draft right now. This is a serious issue. And that's why I implore you to listen to the actual podcast. It's about 30 minutes long, but it was a really good conversation from some very intelligent men who have experience in this field. And after listening to it, I mean, I'm relatively convinced we're going to have the draft if this war actually expands past the borders of Ukraine, right? Um, we don't have the manpower now. We can't fight two adversaries at all, Russia and China. No way. Um, the individual ready reserve is probably going to be expanded in some way. They're going to access that when it comes to trying to get people ready. But the big problem is, and this is something you have to keep in mind, once we're behind, once we don't have enough troops, they're going to be desperate for more bodies. But that really shortens the length of time available for training and to get people properly trained up for wartime. You can't just go start grabbing people off the street and literally throw them on a plane and send them over. Like, you have to have basic training and get people ready. And the longer they wait to enact something like a draft or enact some kind of way of reacquiring some of the IRR to come back in, the harder it will be to have those people trained and ready for when this thing actually goes hot. So that will be an indicator that I think you need to watch for. If you start seeing the individual ready reserve expand, which we already know was tapped on. We know that they actually already tapped many members of the IRR to go over to Europe. So keep that in mind. This was an indicator, but if we see more of that activity, it will indicate that we are closer and closer to the necessity of a draft. The incentives are going to start coming in. They're going to start trying to figure out other methods to recruit people through means that are almost like unreasonable. And possibly, I would also expect to see more of a strategy coming towards older people like myself, right? People who would still be within the physical parameters of being capable of such activity, but might have more incentivization in the sense of trying to better their lives, right? So when I say that, what I mean is, that whole student loan forgiveness program. What if something like that was available to somebody who was, 30 and just had a really big student loan they needed to pay off, but didn't really have any idea of how they were going to be able to do it? Oh, and by the way, worst time ever in the economy to try to get ahead. So I would expect to see those types of incentives to come through as well, because they'll take anybody who qualifies physically and mentally at this point. And I don't think they're only looking for 18-year-olds anymore, especially with how short we are on troops at this point in time. So these indicators are something that you should watch out for. It will show a couple of things. One, it'll show that they're possibly going to have to reinstate the draft. And two, it'll show that they're preparing to actually go hot in this conflict, because you need the people trained and ready to go before, if at all possible. Now, if you get a Pearl Harbor type event and things are just go, go, go at that point, then you do what you got to do. But we are not the same country we were back in 1941 either. So all these considerations have to be put into the equation. And it's just my opinion that we're closer and closer to that reality, and that there will be some red flag style indicators for us to keep an eye out for, to show us just how close we are for that enactment to occur. But that's where we're at right now. And so I just wanted to demonstrate that there's more than one way that as a country we're not really prepared to go into an all-out conflict right now. And that there is data and information coming back from the field now in Ukraine to tell us that maybe some of the tactics or some of the doctrine that we currently operate with wouldn't be as effective as we're used to seeing in the field against a near-peer adversary, right? Which is why you should be willing to adapt yourself, too, as somebody who wants to be prepared. Whether it comes to things like body armor, or when it comes to things like learning first aid and the skills incorporated with that, what should you prioritize? What would maybe make more sense? Are there things you're doing right now that might not actually be relevant in that type of a scenario, because you're looking at more of a near-peer escalation versus just dealing with, like criminal activity? There's a lot of things to consider and to unpack here, but that's all kind of where these things go. It's an interesting time to be alive. That's where I'm at with it. I find a lot of this information to be interesting. Please get some free potassium iodide if you're capable of doing so. I really would like to see that. Now, I do want to go ahead and let everyone know that on the Subscribe Star, I do have the private members only hangout tonight. It's for YouTube channel members and Subscribe Star members. But on the Subscribe Star, I actually do a monthly preparedness incentive. And Midway USA actually hooked it up with some range bags, which are pretty cool. And it's really cool of them to be helping me out when it comes to supporting the Subscribe Star. So this month's, or actually the month of September's preparedness incentive, which is a Midway USA range bag, is actually going to Harbor Prepper. So Harbor Prepper, it was you this time. So that's awesome. And I look forward to getting this sent out to you. But if you want to join the Subscribe Star, it's $5 a month. I do a monthly preparedness incentive like the one I just showed you. And we also we talk about stuff. We communicate there directly. You can message me directly. And I post exclusive content on there where I generally just kind of like share my thoughts or talk about this or that, or maybe give you a heads up on a certain product that I might be making a video on that might sell out directly after, right? So, so these are things that I try to do in order to give back to the community who wants to support me directly financially, which is not a requirement at all, but it is something that I appreciate. And in order to show that appreciation, I try to make it worth everybody's time. And then, of course, YouTube channel members, you guys will be in the chat tonight, hopefully hanging out just to kind of shoot the salad, as we like to say. So keep prepping. You know what to do. I mean, I hope you know what to do. And yeah, I will have more, food videos coming out. I will have more nuclear survival videos coming out. I will have more backup power system videos coming out. Every time I post a couple gun videos, everyone loses their mind and thinks that this channel is just a gun channel now. I'm out of here. Relax. First off, always has been. Very first video on the channel has a gun in it. But second off, I try my best to diversify, but you got to bear with me here. And just, if you don't like every single video, I'm sorry, I'm doing the best I can. I like guns. You know what? I know they're not the end all be all when it comes to preparedness, but since it's something I'm passionate about and I have a decent amount of information that I can share based on the amount of research I do regarding them and the fact that I shoot quite a bit, it's something I can share that I might have more access to or information for than other preparedness related things. So I do focus on them sometimes. It's what I like. Sorry. But yes, we will talk about other things too. I promise you. So I like all of you. Trust me. Razor Wire says, may I suggest you take up medieval castle warfare studies and claim an abandoned concrete grain silo castle like I'll be doing. Listen, medieval castle doctrine can actually teach you quite a bit, especially when it comes to siege warfare. And I expect to see levels of siege warfare throughout any modern conflict because it works. And you know what siege warfare would look like in the modern world? Embargoes, right? Trade embargoes. That's siege warfare. China says, yeah, you're cut off. We're not sending anything to you anymore. Siege warfare. They did it. And especially if they start sending cargo ships full of wet market bats and stuff like that, then yeah, we're definitely in full-blown siege warfare then. So, but listen, all of you are amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for hanging out. If you need anything else from me, magicprepper.com is always a good resource. Big thanks to Midway USA. Also, don't forget Genesis Gold Group at magicpreppergold.com if you want to check that out in case you're interested. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.